Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're going to be exploring a brand new subclass mod that kind of slipped under my radar accidentally. We are going to be looking at Wildfire Druid today, which comes packed with a ton of fun features that are really going to make you feel like a druid pyromancer, which I think is actually a very fun combination of archetypes to make a very solid build. You're going to be doing everything from healing to doing big damage with fire spells. You're going to be summoning fire-based creatures. Now, the mod isn't finished yet. There are still a few more high-level features to be added, but the mod author is working diligently on it. They've done plenty of bug fixes, and are just kind of waiting for more updates to get approved by Larian, I do believe. Otherwise, they are working hard to keep this mod going, so please go and show them their support. Their mod will be linked in the description below. Now, before we get into the build proper, I do want to give out a quick disclaimer, because something kind of big happened yesterday and kind of earlier today. So, Patch 8 got released. But not intentionally. It seems that in an attempt to, release it seemed like Larian were releasing the stress test, yesterday, but seems like someone at PlayStation got the wrong message and accidentally released the full Patch 8 that is still in the testing phase on consoles early, which is causing some issues both within the community and obviously with PlayStation as a whole, because obviously now people who updated to Patch 8 are now playing an unstable version with a ton of issues that could potentially mess up their save files, as well as the fact that obviously this means that a bunch of Patch 8's content has been leaked onto the internet, including, how all the classes and subclasses are working, what features they have, what's been changed, all that sort of thing. Now, as for this channel, and whether or not I'm going to cover the Patch 8 content now that it's technically released, I'm going to say no. Not only do I not play this game on PlayStation for starters, I also will not be covering any of the leaks or anything like that out of pure respect for Larian. So for anyone who is going to comment asking about Patch 8 content or whether or not I'm going to be doing Patch 8 stuff now, I'm going to wait for the full release because I respect Larian as a developer, and obviously this has gone entirely against their wishes, and I would much rather play with the full, ready-to-go Patch 8 when it comes out and build things properly. So I thought I'd get that little disclaimer out the way because I know I'm going to be asked about it. And for the record, my general advice is don't install Patch 8 if you're on PlayStation. Wait until the actual patch comes out. And for those of you who do have it installed, apparently if you uninstall and reinstall the game, you'll be downgraded back to Patch 7. So there's your fix. Right, without further ado, let's get into the build. I'm going to be playing as a tiefling today because, fire-based druid, tiefling, kind of makes sense. Built a lot of tieflings lately, but hey, I do quite like them. That's going to innately get us fire resistance, which we actually do want on this build one way or another, so we might as well take it here. Regular dark vision and the base racial speed of 9 meters, so all in all, pretty standard. Moving on, I've also gone with Asmodeus Tiefling. This will get us things like Darkness later on, which of course you can put on the Eversight Ring to do some Darkness Devil Sight stuff, but I kind of like the idea of having Darkness on this build because you can kind of flavour it as a cloud of smoke with how it appears in the game visually. So I kind of went with Asmodeus because I wanted it, as well as we're going to get the Produce Flame cantrip, which we wouldn't normally be able to get otherwise. Unfortunately, it does use our charisma, but we still get to use it to create a light source on our arm, which is like a blue flame, which I thought could look quite cool with the visuals of the build. So I was happy to go with Asmodeus, but you can play any race you like. It's not integral to the build in any way. Moving on, obviously we're going to be playing a druid today. There is some room for multiclassing in this build if you want to take some levels here or there of other things to get certain features. Maybe a dip into light cleric would actually be quite fun, but I am going to be showing off the Wildfire Druid in its entirety because it does have a lot going on that I want to delve into. So we're going to be going full druid today. Again, this is kind of a mod showcase plus build, showing off some equipment and some feats that'll work well with it. Otherwise, feel free to kind of take some multi-classing dips here that you think would be thematic. Personally, some sorcerer dips might be nice as well. Maybe a little bit of wizard. Like I said, light cleric could also be a fun option. Hell, even if you wanted to take 2 levels of paladin and do some searing smite stuff, that could be really fun as well. And obviously, action surge from fighter, always a good shout. So feel free to kind of play around with this one. There is a lot of room for multiclassing with this subclass, as it kind of depends on what you want to go for most. But I think if you want to get the most out of all of the Wildfire Druid subclass features, go to level 10, I would say, because that's where you get all of the wild shape stuff as well, because yes, this build does augment your wild shapes a bit. Moving on to cantrips, we only really have one fire-based cantrip. I mean, we do have Produce Flame here, but we did get that from our race, and again, I probably wouldn't use it over some other options that this build has available to it. If you want the other fire cantrip, this comes from Mistra's Mods, by the way, which is available to all platforms and is basically vanilla content at this point. You can go for Create Bonfire, which is a concentration spell, but it does kind of do like a damage over time thing, which fits well for the build, but honestly, you can sub this out if you don't want it, but I'm going to take it here anyway, and I've gone with Guidance because it's one of the best cantrips in the game. But things like Shillelagh, if you want to use a club with this build, you absolutely can if you want. Resistance is also a nice option. I also like Moonflare as a radiant damage option if you want to go down that route, and Thorn Whip is always fun. So feel free to pick your favourites here, entirely up to you. Moving on, we have our ability scores. Pretty standard druid spread here. 17 in wisdom, we're going to be bumping this up with a half feat later, and it is our primary spellcasting modifier. Intelligence is at 10, we don't really need it, but I kind of liked having intelligence more than charisma on this build, but feel free to swap that out if you like. I mean, obviously we are playing a tiefling, so a 10 in charisma might be better, but when I actually thought about the character themselves here, I kind of went for intelligence, because what Wildfire Druids basically are, is their whole thing is like, well, yes, we use controlled burns and the natural force of flame to cull, you know, blighted or dying areas so that new life can spring anew. Their whole point is like when firefighters in real life do controlled burns so that new things can grow in their place, and it also stops the spread of like maybe invasive species and such like that. So I figured a little bit of intelligence made a bit of sense, like a lot of what they do is calculated and deliberate, so that's why I kind of love Wildfire Druid, and you're going to see there's like a theme of death and rebirth here, like you kind of burn things away and then they get healed up naturally. So like I said, you're going to be doing a little bit of healing with this build as we go on. And finally, Constitution is at 16. We've got a few concentration spells in this build, and I did like the idea of us being a bit tankier, so I did want to have a decent chunk of HP. Dexterity is at 14. We don't really need it to be massively high, as we're not really going to be focusing on using our weapons. We're more of a spellcaster with this build, and this build does use medium armor, so I did want to make sure that we had at least a 14 in dex so we get the most out of the average medium armor, but of course you can swap Constitution and Dexterity around if you want to do a bit more kind of like regular melee attacks, which there will be an option for, because obviously this build gets Flame Blade. So entirely up to you how you want to go about the stats here. Feel free to zhuzh them up a little bit if you want. Otherwise, let's move on to the skill proficiencies. Now, of course, I went with the Outlander background, because of course I did, giving us access to Athletics and Survival. We're also going to grab Nature and Animal Handling. Since we're not building for Charisma, I'm not going to be taking Speak with Animals in this build, because if I take Speak with Animals, that kind of means we have to build to Charisma, which kind of is antithetical to a Druid when you really think about it. So we're going to go with Animal Handling and just skip Speak with Animals altogether. So yeah, that is our build at level 1. Let's move on. At level 2, we get to choose our subclass, and well, we're totally going to go with Circle of the Moon. I'm kidding, Circle of Wildfire, the brand new subclass, which I'm very happy to show off. Let's read the flavor text. Druids within the Circle of Wildfire understand that destruction is sometimes the precursor of creation. Slight typo there. Such as when a forest promotes later growth. So basically the whole idea, like I said, is controlled burns to allow new life to spread. These druids bond with a primal spirit that harbours both destructive and creative power, allowing the druids to create controlled flames that burn away one thing but give life to another. Very, very cool lore. I absolutely, like, from a lore perspective and like a flavour thing, Circle of Wildfire is one of my favourite subclasses of all time. Shout out to my buddy Ben, who I'm in a D&D group with, who actually plays a Wildfire Druid and does so very, very well. It's a very, very fun subclass in general, and so I'm really happy to show it off today. But at level 2, we're going to get some unique features and spells. Namely, we're going to gain access to Burning Hands, which druids normally wouldn't be able to get, which is a very solid damaging fire spell, which I'm happy to have. We're also going to get Cure Wounds added to our spell list automatically, so we don't have to prepare it. This is great. Again, this is going to be a healing thing, which a lot of druids like to do anyway. And again, it kind of plays into that idea of destruction and rebirth. So there is a focus on healing with this build, and depending on your equipment options, you can put more of a focus onto that if you want. But most of the time, all you really need is healing word. Moving on, we now have our Summon Primal Spirit. For those of you who wanted an alternative to Beastmaster Ranger, you've got it. You get to expend a wild shape charge to summon a Primal Spirit bound to your soul. It appears with a fiery aura which deals damage to nearby enemies unless they succeed a dex save. So there's multiple different kinds of Primal Spirits. They can take on different forms: a dog, a humanoid, and a couple of others. We'll get into those in a minute. And each of them have slightly different abilities, but are mostly the same, and will get more powerful as they level up. Again, the mod is not 100% finished yet, so that some of the higher level features aren't there, but when they do get there, this build will only be even stronger. But for now, I'm just showing you a baseline that will work the more the mod gets updated, but for now it's still quite strong. Moving on to our spell selection, we've got a few interesting choices here. First up, I've gone with Absorb Elements, because again, it kind of makes sense that if we're going to be spreading fire around, we're going to need to be able to reduce the damage we take from it. You take half damage from the next elemental attack targeting you, and you deal an additional 1d6 of that element type on your next attack. Basically, it's just an instant damage reduction in a similar way to shield, except you're reducing damage rather than just avoiding it entirely. Honestly, I think it has a lot of utility. I think it's just a great defensive spell to have in general. And also it works against cold damage so that our flames won't be put out. But speaking of putting out flames, I've gone with Create or Destroy Water here, because again, these are controlled burns, so the fact that you might be able to use water to put out something that may be kind of spreading a bit further than you would like, or you just use general rainfall to help contain certain flames and put out the fires that you start. I don't know, it just made sense for a druid that focuses on controlled burning to have Create Water. Next up, we have Healing Word. Again, this is going to partner with the Cure Wounds that we just got. This will allow us to heal any creature we can see for a small amount of hit points. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but if you have an ally that is down, this is the best spell to get them up. And you never know when you can just top up yourself or an ally for a little bit. Also, this will trigger any effects from equipment that work with healing as well, so it's basically just a quick buff that you can apply at different times. Overall, one of the most versatile healing spells. Most tabletop players will know this. Moving on, we've got Goodberry. I mean, the description of the subclass talked about creation, so, you know, let's create some snacks, because, you know, every adventuring party needs their snacks. And for your final spell, it can be whatever you like. It really doesn't matter. We've got most things already that I would say this build absolutely wants. I mean, if you just want an overall general buff, you can take Longstrider. I think it's a good thing to have. At level 3 of Druid, we're going to gain access to level 2 spells, including 2 new spells from our subclass: Flaming Sphere, which we already had on our spell list, but we don't have to prepare it, and Scorching Ray, which is normally reserved for wizards and sorcerers. We get it here as well. One of the best offensive fire spells in the game. It is very welcome here. At level 3, we're also going to get Hellish Rebuke from our race, allowing us to retaliate with 3d10, I should say, fire damage whenever we're hit by an attack. It's only once per long rest, but hey, better than nothing. We also get to prepare another couple of spells at this point, including our level 2 spells. I'm obviously going to be going with Flame Blade and Heat Metal. Heat Metal is an amazing spell that I personally don't give enough love to. It allows you to cause a metal weapon or armor to glow red hot and forces the wearer to either let go or receive disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. That's actually pretty huge. If the creature is only wearing metal armor, it always receives a disadvantage. So basically, it either forces your opponent to always roll with disadvantage, or drop their weapon, which can also be very, very potent. If the creature is still touching the metal, you can use a bonus action on subsequent turns to deal another 2d8 fire damage and force the creature to let go or receive disadvantage, so you can keep applying this pressure over multiple bits of time. So honestly, it's damage over time and a significant debuff that can come in multiple different creative forms. I don't know, it just feels perfect for a Wildfire Druid. And obviously Flame Blade, which I think if you're going to use a weapon with this build, this is going to be your primary weapon. It counts as a spell attack, it uses your wisdom modifier, it's really good, and it can be upscaled quite nicely, and only costs a bonus action to cast, meaning that you can cast it as a bonus action and then attack with your action on the same turn. I would say, if you're going to use a weapon, use this one. You're not going to get extra attack or anything like this with this build, but you can dual wield because the Flame Blade is finesse, and we can talk about that, or light I should say, and we can talk about that a bit later. But for other options, you could take Aid on this build, which I actually think is a very solid option, since you're going to be summoning a lot with this playstyle. Obviously, your Primal Spirit being your main summon, you will want to be able to make them as buff as possible, so Aid would be very, very welcome. So I would recommend that. Right, I would say from here, let's move on. At level 4, you're going to get your first feat, but first, a cantrip. Entirely up to you what you want to take here, it really doesn't matter. Moving on, we can also grab another level 2 spell. I'm going to grab the aforementioned Aid to give both you and your primal spirit, and the rest of your party, a massive buff to their HP. And finally, we do get to pick up a half feat here to bump up our mental stats. Entirely up to you what you want to grab here, as long as you're grabbing something that you can use to bump up your wisdom. Now, in my kind of planning for the lore of this build, I really like the idea of our Wildfire, so again they're able to create heat, Druid being something of a culinary enthusiast, let's say. Like, obviously we took Goodberry at level 1, which is kind of like about, you know, creation, you know, you're creating new life to cook with. So we're gonna grab the Chef feat, allowing us to bump up our Wisdom to an 18, or our Constitution if you decide to do your stats a bit differently, and you get the ability to use the Chef's Treat action. You get to cook a treat. Creatures who eat the treat gain temporary hit points. You and all allies regain all hit points on a short rest as well, so you get to cook a meal during a short rest to make it so everyone recovers all of their hit points. So it has a nice bit of flavour, literally, and a nice bit of utility overall, and it helps bump up one of our soft stats. And again, I love the idea of this druid going into nature, getting a bunch of foodstuffs, and putting them all together in a like cooking pot, and then lighting the fire themselves with their own magic, and like their primal spirit maybe is like helping to stoke the flames and such like that. I don't know, it's a fun flavour thing. It's literally, again, it's not even like the most powerful option, but if you want something that's a bit more combat orientated and would probably be more useful overall, Fey Touched, Shadow Touched, Telekinetic, all of the usual stuff. By the way, this is all coming from the Tasha's Feet mod, which is available on all platforms, and again, I basically consider it vanilla content, since it's all from tabletop and is fairly balanced. Druid level 5, giving us access to level 3 spells, including Plant Growth and Revivify. Plant Growth and Revivify are obviously playing more into the healing angle, and yes, it is unfortunate, but no, we're not getting Fireball with this one. But I do think that gives us a little bit more of diversity for what we're able to use our spell slots on, and I like the idea of getting Plant Growth and Revivify here, as it does play into the kind of lesser focused on aspect of Wildfire Druid, which is all about the healing and Rebirth. So personally, as a lore guy, which I'm not really, but let's be real here, I know more than I should at this point, I definitely think that Plant Growth and Revivify work pretty well here. But overall, we do get some interesting level 3 options to pick from as well, including an interesting choice here. Now, I've not got a bow and arrow on this build, but at any point you could grab one and use Flame Arrows, a concentration-based spell, which is why I wouldn't recommend it unless you're doing this kind of thing. But as a bonus action, you can imbue 6 pieces of ammunition with Fiery Might. They deal an additional 2 to 12 fire damage. Overall, a pretty solid buff, but maybe not one I would recommend for this build with our lower dexterity. However, if you don't mind spending the concentration, give this to an ally. Maybe your sharpshooter rogue fighter buddy who is going to be firing off massive amounts of damage, give them even more damage. I don't know, there's maybe some utility here, and obviously it fits the fire theme of the build, but otherwise, yeah, I can't really say I recommend it. Other things I can recommend though are Elemental Weapon, if you want to imbue an a weapon either that you wield or an ally wields with a bit of firepower to give it a +1 bonus to attack rolls and an additional d4 of fire damage. That could be fun. One spell I am going to recommend though is Warden of Vitality. For no concentration at all, you can basically cast an aura on yourself that allows you to cast Restore Vitality with a bonus action on subsequent turns to do healing every single turn. So if you're not doing anything with your bonus action anyway, just get free healing. I mean, hey, I would say this is a pretty good feature for 10 turns and not requiring concentration. I think this works perfect for the healer angle. As for your other spell, I would probably go back down to something with a bit more utility from either level 1 or 2. I would say something maybe like Healing Spirit could be a very fun option. Summon Beast if you want to lean more into the summoner angle, but that's not really fire themed. There's a few different things you could do here. It's entirely up to you. I would just say pick your favorite kind of thing that comes with the utility. I did take Flame Arrows in my testing, and I did do some testing with it, and it can work, so I'll use it here to fill the slot and fill the theme, and I like it as an ally buffing spell, but otherwise, feel free to take something else. At level 6 of Druid, we're getting some pretty typical Druid things. We're getting the Panther and Owlbear wild shapes, the Owlbear being my personal favourite. Moving on, we do get to prepare another spell at this level, and again, it's a pick your favourite situation, doesn't really matter what you take here. At Druid level 7, we get access to level 4 spells, including some subclass based spells. At this point, we actually do get Warden of Vitality, meaning that we no longer have to prepare it, which is great for us, as well as Fire Shield, a very, very appropriate spell for this build, so I'm happy to have it here. But now moving on, we do get to prepare some level 4 spells, so let's take a look at our options. And we have a lot of good ones to work with. Obviously, we're taking Wall of Fire, a fun control spell that just makes sense for this build. Again, controlled flames, a controlled wall of fire, makes sense. We're also going to get 2 summon spells that are related to fire. We're going to get Conjure Minor Elemental, which will let us summon an Azure, which is a fire dwarf thing, as well as Summon Elemental, letting us summon what is essentially a minor fire elemental, which is great. We now are starting to build up our little summoned army. We do have another interesting fire-related spell, but I'll talk about that at the next level. And here we are at the next level, level 8, in which we get to prepare an extra couple of spells, and I'm going to be choosing Elemental Bane. For our concentration, we get to choose an enemy to lose resistance to a damage type of our choosing. For us, obviously, this is going to be fire, and the first time each turn that the target takes that damage type, in our case fire, they take an extra 2d6 of that damage. Now, it is a constitution save as well as a concentration spell, but since so many of our summoned allies will deal fire damage, we can stay in the back, let our allies take advantage of this, and then us ourselves not having to worry about it. Yes, this means we won't get to concentrate on something like Heat Metal, for example, or Wall of Fire, but hey, each of these spells are situational. Pick what you need in the moment and work with it. As for another spell that you can grab, it's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. I like Freedom of Movement as a general buff, and again, I like the idea of kind of having the lands stride beneath your feet, just allowing you to overcome difficult terrain, so I'm going to grab that here. We also do get to pick up another feat at this point. Now, at this point, I'd say we're in a pretty comfortable position. We have Wisdom at 18, Constitution at 16, and Dex at 14. I think overall, you'll have your medium armor at this point. You're going to feel pretty solid. I don't think we need to push our Wisdom to the max just yet. So let's grab something that is going to be essential for pretty much every pyromancy-based build, Elemental Adept, the fire variant. Your spells and attacks will ignore resistance to a damage type of your choice, and when you cast spells of that type, you cannot roll a 1. This means that if something is resistant to fire, which is very common in this game, we just get to overcome that resistance. We won't get to overcome immunity, but hey, since we're doing so much fire stuff, this does feel great to have, so we're going to pick it up now. At Druid level 9, we get access to level 5 spells, including Mass Cure Wounds, which is great, means we don't have to prepare it, and Flame Strike. Very exclusive club this one belongs to, usually only reserved for clerics, and, well, fiend warlocks, which is kind of fun. But anyways, we now have Flame Strike on a Druid, which is going to feel very, very fun to use. Remember when I said earlier that we don't get Fireball? This is just a flat-out better version of it, dealing 5d6 fire damage and 5d6 radiant. Slightly smaller area of effect, but still a very potent AoE fire spell. Moving on to our level 5 spell choices. I mean, there's a couple here that I think immediately stand out that most people are going to want to grab. The first, obviously, being Conjure Elemental. Now, we get to summon a Fire Elemental in full force, but of course we can have Conjure and Summon Elemental both up at the same time, so now we have 2 Fire Elementals, and with a 6th level spell slot, which we'll be getting very soon, you'll be able to summon a Fire Myrmidon, one of the most powerful fire-based summons in the game. Once we reach the next level, we'll take the next spell. Repeating joke, here's the next level. But anyways, we now get improved Wild Strike, meaning now we can make 2 additional attacks after an unarmed strike while in wild shapes. Now our wild shapes are at full power. We also get the ability to use the Wildfire Druid and the Fire Myrmidon as well, which normally you wouldn't actually have access to. So normally you would only gain access to the Myrmidon transformations if you were in, Moon Druid, if you were a Moon Druid. But here we actually do get Fire Myrmidon as well. You know what? I've just realised why there's a separate Wild Shape and Wildfire Dilophosaurus. It's because there's a separate thing for them which allows Fire Myrmidon to exist. I understand now. I feel like an idiot this entire time. Okay, never mind then. I'm going to cut those parts out of the video if I can help it. Whoops. Never mind. You didn't hear or see anything. So, anyways, Fire Myrmidon transformation, which we wouldn't normally get unless we're a Moon Druid, which is great. Moving on, we do get to pick another cantrip at this point. Let's grab Thorn Whip, because I feel like it's a fun one. And finally, our next summoning spell. Come on, you just gotta summon a dragon, man. It's just the fun thing to do. We get to summon a fire-based red dragon with this spell, allowing us to gain all of our allies to gain resistance to fire damage while within a certain range of it. And of course, it just comes with, you know, it's fire breath, it's multi-attack, it's a dragon. You want to summon a dragon. At Druid level 11, we gain access to level 6 spells. Nothing particularly added from our subclass here, we just have a pretty strong selection. And my main level 6 spell, what I'm going to want to include on this build, is Elemental Investiture. Elemental Investiture is a concentration spell which allows you to imbue yourself with an element of your choice, gaining an immunity to that element, resistances, as well as other elemental-based abilities. So we're going to be able to cast Investiture of Fire, get a couple of fire-related abilities, as well as a flat-out immunity to fire, which, as a capstone for this build, feels very, very nice. And finally, at Druid level 12, we get to take an extra feat and prepare an extra spell. And that extra spell that we're going to prepare is Hero's Feast, another level 6 spell. Because again, we're going to be doing so much summoning, we can stack Aid and Hero's Feast together to give all of our summons and allies a massive boost to their HP, as well as making wisdom saves with advantage as well, and can't be poisoned, diseased, or frightened. This is just an amazing level 6 spell to have. Combine this with Aid to just make all of your summons and yourself incredibly tanky. Moving on, we do get to pick a final feat, and I am going to bump up our wisdom to its final form of 20. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a lot. I mean, you're doing all the druid stuff that you would normally want to do. You're healing, you're summoning, you're wild shaping, and it's all going to work out pretty goddamn well for you, especially getting the Fire Myrmidon transformation built in here, which I absolutely love. Now, of course, the main draw here is the Primal Fire Spirit, which can come in a few forms. You've got a humanoid, a bear, a raven, and a wolf. As far as I understand, these all function pretty much the same, obviously with the exception of the raven having the flight. We can have a look at that now. But they all come with the kind of the same abilities overall. You get the Flame Seed ability, you get the Fiery Teleportation, and you just get their regular attack. Nothing too crazy there. Basically, it's mainly just for flavor, as all of them can fly as well. I did forget to mention that. So it's basically just choosing your preferred flavor of spirit. It was nice of the mod developer to give us a few options instead of just the bog standard one. But yeah, no, so you do gain a few options and they all have the same abilities. So, a basic attack, which all of them have. The Fiery Teleport, which can teleport yourself and the creature up to a certain distance, as well as creating an explosion where you teleport from, dealing a bit of damage. Obviously, the maneuverability of flight is great, and the main thing they're going to get here is a Flame Seed attack. Now again, all of this may seem pretty weak for a max level build, but again, this mod is still a work in progress. You will gain access to more things as the mod updates, and the mod developer is actively working on it, so just be patient. This will get more powerful, but even now, it's just a tanky extra body to have on the field, which can do passive damage and has some movement utility every turn. So overall, I still quite like it. So yeah, but even in addition to everything like that, you just get to play a powerful Pyromancer as well. So you're summoning, you're really powerful offensively, you have a ton of utility options available to you, you get to heal, you're just going to be one of the best druids around, no question about it. So anyways, let's move on to the equipment. Right, so, as I already stated for this build, my weapon of choice would be Flame Blade. However, you have a couple of options for what to do with Flame Blade in addition to it. So, I've gone with the Sylvan Scimitar here. Instead of your Dexterity modifier, this will use your Wisdom modifier for the attack and damage rolls. It says only attack rolls, but it is both. And so with this, you will be able to pair this with Flame Blade to be able to have a decent dual wielding combo to be able to use Flame Blade in your offhand, without having to invest into dexterity, where you can combine this in Act 3 with the Pyro Quickness hat to give yourself an extra bonus action every time you attack with Flame Blade, meaning that you basically get extra attack that way. So there is a way of kind of doing like the Flame Blade extra attack combo if you want a bit of martial focus with this. If you don't care about that so much, then just slap a shield on this bad boy and use it with Flame Blade. In my opinion, the Sentinel Shield is pretty good, giving you a +3 bonus to initiative rolls and advantage on perception checks, meaning that you're very, very unlikely to not be going early in the initiative order, even with our slightly middling dexterity, which of course then allows you to set up your spells a lot quicker. So overall, that is my choice. Moving on to our headpiece, obviously I already talked about the Pyro Quickness hat being an option in Act 3, but for the main game I'd say the Hat of Fire Acuity is going to do you pretty well. Whenever you deal fire damage, you gain Arcane Acuity for 2 turns. Of course, Arcane Acuity gives you a bonus to spell attack rolls and spell difficulty class. A lot of our spells have DC requirements, so being able to make those harder and harder to succeed with each subsequent casting of our fire-based spells is going to be really good for this build, so I highly recommend this hat for the majority of your game. Otherwise, if you want to do that Flame Blade strat, go for the Pyro Quickness hat. Moving on, I do have the Cloak of Protection on this build. This is just here to give us a bit of a buff to our Constitution saving throws for our concentration, as well as our Armour class to give it a bit more, because I did want slightly higher armor class on this build so we were a bit tanky, but you can have whatever in this slot. Moving on, for my armor of choice we have the Adamantine Scale Mail. I said that completely wrong then, I don't know what's wrong with me. This makes it so all incoming damage is reduced by 1, that actually will have some relevance later. When a melee attack hits you, the attacker is sent reeling for 2 turns, so if you hit with an attack, they gain the reeling status effects, which means they have a penalty to attack rolls, meaning that they're less likely to hit you with subsequent attacks, and critical hits cannot be landed against you. Now, this is actually a really solid overall pick, but if you want something with a bit more of a theme to it in the late game, especially if you're not playing a Tiefling, go for the Flame Enameled Armour, giving you a +2 bonus to initiative rolls, which again, stack that with the Sentinel Shield to basically always go first. You'll have resistance to fire damage if you're not already playing a Tiefling, and an even bigger bonus to saving throws to help with your concentration, as well as the ability to use the Fire Shield Warm, the fire variant of it, once per long rest without using one of your precious spell slots, so overall, pretty good choice. Next up, the Thermo-Arcanic Gloves. Whenever you deal fire damage, you gain 2 turns of heat. Now, this is kind of a throwaway slot, but heat will allow you to do a little bit more damage with your fire attacks, with Heat Convergence, which allows you to consume stacks of heat to deal additional fire damage on your next fire damage attack. But you do take 1d4 fire damage every turn, which can be a bit of a caveat. However, because we are resistant to fire damage and we can wear the Adamantine Scale Mail, which reduces all coming damage by 1, you can only take 1 damage per turn with this effect. So overall, it's pretty damn good. But of course this is a throwaway slot that gives us more firepower. If you want to go for things like the Hellrider's Pride or even the Reviving Hands in the late game to focus more on the healing and buffing aspect, feel free to take that instead. I would say it's either the Thermo-Arcanic Gloves or the Hellrider's Pride or the Reviving Hands. Kind of take your pick there. And finally, I didn't really have an appropriate boot slot, so I thought I'd round up our AC to a nice even 20 with the Evasive Shoes, giving us a +1 to our Acrobatics and Armor class. Moving on to our accessories, I don't have a specific amulet for this build, but I do recommend the Spellcrux Amulet if you want to get both Investiture of Flame and the Hero's Feast off in a single long rest. And then finally onto the rings, we have the Shapeshifter's Boon Ring, which while shapeshifting, so wild shaping, you gain a 1d4 bonus to all checks. And lastly, the Whispering Promise. Whenever you heal a creature, it basically gains Bless, a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws. If we're healing ourselves, this is going to help us with things like concentration saves, which is great, but also the buff to attack rolls is quite nice as well. Now finally, for our camp clothing, we have access to the Fear Tailor mod, which is available on all platforms, to give us the Fear Tailor outfit, which as you can see, looks bloody awesome, so quite happy with that choice. And it's coloured in the Faerunian Colours mod, Asmodeus Dye, which again, available on all platforms. Give us this kind of smoky black with a tinge of fiery red and a bit of gold in there as well, which I think just looks absolutely badass with the Tiefling look. And yeah, that is the build. As I said, what you're going to be getting out of this is a fun, fire-themed druid. You get to do all the great druid stuff while keeping to the theme, as well as augmenting your wild shape with the Fire Myrmidon shape, and even being able to gain access to, a unique fire-based summon. Again, the mod is still a work in progress, but once it is finished, I think you're going to have a super fun time with this one overall. Now, normally I would drag out this ending section, but I actually do feel my voice starting to go, as I have been sick over the past couple of days and I've not quite recovered. If you see a lot of awkward cuts in this video, that's because I've had coughing fits, so I'm going to stop here for now. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.